Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for swinging by and checking out Todd-Bits today. Very excited about our guest, very excited about the show. This is a topic that doesn't get a lot of press, doesn't get a lot of airways, gets a lot of negativity at times, and we're going to uplift that and talk about it in a little bit more detail and why this is so important. We're going to talk about operations, warehousing, management, all that kind of stuff, and what it really means in today's world. So please give it up for my buddy, back in the center part of this country, beautiful Indianapolis, coming in hot and heavy today to share his wisdom with us like an owl. I can't wait for this. Please give it up for the co-founder and managing partner of KESI Management, Austin Kirtley. Dude, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Looking forward to it. I'll tell you, you're building me up here, and I got a lot of things to build up to make ops sound good. So I'll do my best.
Well, you know, dude, and I appreciate that. Yes, I am building you up because I have high expectations of you. If it doesn't work, we just won't release this broadcast. I'll put it in the camera. No, I'm teasing. No, I'm teasing. You know, but this is, you know, we've been talking for a while about this, and I know who you guys are and what you're about, and it was easy to kind of lean into this and your team and who's there. And it really is a topic that we don't talk about a lot. It's a topic we complain about a lot, but it's not a topic we try to really get deep into solutions. And what you guys are doing from a broad-based perspective of what KESI Management's up to is really, really cool. So I want to kind of get into all that. I've got my standard 3 million questions probably for you, however this is going to work out. But I'm looking forward to this because I think this is going to be really an eye-opening experience for people to really recognize the value that's sitting outside the door that nobody wants to go into because it's cold, and really consider. So before we get into all that, and I go off on my soapbox and rev this thing up like I normally do, tell everybody a little bit about you and your bio and your journey and how you got roped into hanging out with me today.
So let's just be honest. I mean, I don't think anybody really plans on getting into produce or something this crazy within the food industry, because once you get in it, you're stuck in it.
Yeah.
I was not planning on getting into food. I was actually a finance guy, finance back, MBA in finance. And then all of a sudden I found myself in the floral industry, and then slowly made the transition into produce, and then got suckered in. And now here I am. But, when we started KESI a few years back, really, we took a lot of the experiences of looking through the industry and just said, hey, there's a big challenge within our industry of trying to help get product to customer. We've got a great ideas of brands. We've got a great ideas of what things look like. So when we started looking through it, is trying to evaluate, like, how does the product get there?
Right.
What does the process it go through? And you sit it there in the breakfast and you have a cup of coffee, you have your banana, you open it, but nobody really tries to figure out how do you get a banana for 49 cents a pound or whatever it may be now, and what are all the processes that go through it, and how can we keep eating this product and keep having this at our doorstep every single day? And so we started looking at those challenges and we started digging in pretty deep, and that was really the formation of this business. And it's evolved since we started, and we've kind of looked through a variety of different things, but we really just focus on the food industry as a whole. We look up and down the value chain from the field to the end customer and how that product gets there, how it's value added, what needs to be done. And since there, we've expanded, and we've got the opportunity to see so many great facilities over the past couple of years. Been over 50 some facilities, and it's amazing to me to see all the different challenges that people have to go through to do what they do.
Oh, for sure. There's no two ways about it. And again, it's a part of the business that we complain about, but not necessarily the part of the business we always work hard to solve. I mean, truthfully. Yeah. Right. I mean, look, if I had $1 for every time somebody complained about a truck or somebody complained about loading, whatever the case may be, we'd all be retired. Right.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, so I remember waking up to phone calls at 6 a.m. and wondering why the truck driver didn't show up to get a product out the door. And I'm like, those are the challenges and frustrations that, how can we fix those solves, especially in this market today? It's crazy.
And there's no doubt. So let's talk a little bit. Let's give everybody a little bit of a frame up of what KESI's all about. So tell us a little bit about what KESI Management is and really what you guys do. And then I'm going to peel it back and dive in a little deeper on some topics.
Yeah. So KESI Management was founded on the principle of focusing on the food and beverage industry and how do we bring this industry to the forefront of innovation. There's a lot of areas of opportunity where you look through the value chain of any business, whether that's, again, inbound operations to distribution to production or value add to ultimately shipping to the customer. So our business, when we started this, was focusing on those core concepts within the business and how do we make that more efficient, or whatever the goal may be for that business, whether I got to double my output, or hey, I've got to streamline my cost because I'm losing here. So what we've done over the past few years, and as we've built our team, we specifically go in and focus on those companies and help them solve their problems from an operational standpoint. We're by no means, I won't be able to tell you, hey, this is the right thing to sell, but I'll show you how, here's the most efficient way. to sell it.
To sell it, right.
So we've done that from, the supply chain, the financial, we've done it from the engineering and automation design, through conceptual facility design work, through, again, all the way to the supply chain of shipping that product, whether it's direct to a store or direct to a consumer, with all these meal kits companies coming out and all these deliveries.
Right on. I love it. Well, as we said, I said in the opening, operations is kind of a topic that's not really talked about unless you're an operations person. That's kind of it, right? It's not that broad a bet. And I think it needs to be, because it affects it affects everything throughout the supply chain. I think we need to give it more credit than it actually is. I mean, it's very multidimensional. In a lot of ways, it's not concrete, like, an apple is concrete or a box of cookies is concrete. So, it's the moving parts that make the cookie, right? Is really what we're talking about in a lot of ways. So would you agree, or can you elaborate a little bit on that thought about, what operations actually does and is for folks that don't really understand? Because I think there's probably people out there today that, oh, you have an operations manager. What's he actually do? Well, I really don't know. He's just out there in the warehouse, right?
Well, let's take like the produce industry, for example.
Yeah.
A lot of people they think about produce, they think about a farm, right? And you sit there and say, hey, when I was out in California looking at a grape field, I'm like, here's these beautiful grapes, right? Cool. And then all of a sudden you buy it in a bag. I get my wife just bought a bunch of the cotton candy grapes, right? So our kids love it. How that whole process from that field getting to your grocery store or being able to buy, I look at operations as there's so many different segments from that time frame, whether that's the guys working to harvest the grapes, from the guys looking and the groups looking to pack them in the bags, from there to the cooler to the grocery store distribution center, from the distribution center to that store. Those within operations are all of those processes and steps that get you to the end game goal. And today, I think with COVID, what it did during the time frame is it just showed such a challenge within each of those individual steps. Now, each one was impacted differently, but I look at operations as, people seem to think it's just a distribution center maybe, but every single piece that leads up to it, whether it's a field, that's an operation. Whether it's a pack house, that's an operation. Whether it's the guy who's receiving it in at the retail store and placing it on there, that's an operation. It just, the name operations just kind of gets thrown in as this black hole of like, it's a standard person on a forklift putting something in. That's not operations, at least in my perception.
Agreed 100%
of what we're doing. So it's changed, things are different now than what it used to be, but I still think the principles, like, we still have to touch it. That's the one thing about food I look at. You're never going to get away from the fields. Like, you can't automate growing, right? That doesn't work that way. Yeah, you can do what you can, but all of those things from that point to the customer is really what I consider the operational side.
Absolutely. And, you make a really good point about that black hole of stuff. And, when you guys come in and you work with a client, you guys take a really deep holistic approach. I mean, you're looking, to your point, you're looking from point A to point B, you're looking, all the way down the supply chain. Where are those holes? Where are those gaps? And because you guys are managing, or providing solutions to managing kind of all that from A to Z.
Yeah. So take, for example, a lot of, especially right now with labor, or like just the industry as a whole, like everybody talks about the area that it's staffing. And I mean, I feel like everywhere I go, there's a hiring sign. Well, most people, when you go into it, they may sit there and say, I have this problem. Well, to your point, we try to take a step back and say, well, what's causing that problem? Is it really this person? Is it a staffing issue? Is it this issue ahead of it? Is it the customer requirements? Is it, what is driving that? So what we try to do is not be blinded. I read a quote that talks about like assumptions blind, hypotheses guide. So I don't want to make any assumptions within what the business, what somebody says. I really want to come to the conclusion and literally what happens, as well as what the numbers or data tells you. So then you can come to the appropriate conclusion.
Right. I love that. I agree. Something, when we were chatting, you said something to me that sparked up my radar a little bit. And you mentioned to me that, it's pretty, and it wasn't let's go have drinks or go play golf, but you sparked it, but you mentioned to me that innovation is not just about technology. Can you explain that a little bit? Because I think it's really a powerful statement. Thanks for joining the Todd-versation. And now, a word from our sponsor.
Hi, it's Fred Valentino, East Coast Director of RGO Produce Marketing. Thank you for listening to Todd-versation and Todd-Bits. At RGO Produce, we're closing the information gap. Headquartered in the heart of California's Central Valley, the nation's largest and most fertile agricultural growing region, we know fresh produce. With locations across the country, we blend digital innovation with human intelligence to bring the best quality produce to our customers. RJO measures fresh produce quality, taking the speculation out of the buying process. At RJO, we simplify selecting quality because we are quality driven, and I promise you, quality delivered. Are you sure you know what your produce looks like? We do. Give us a call or go online at rjoproduce.com and let us help elevate your customer's experience.
Yeah, so I'm gonna default back to the produce industry. So
Yeah, for sure.
So people nowadays look at like all the transitions of technology out there. It's forklifts, it's automation, it's AI, and it's all these different things. Well, innovation is simply like changing what you do today and coming up with a new process. And so what innovation may mean for somebody at a facility that's extremely automated, it was maybe a new robot, like that's innovative. Like that's really cool. That's at the forefront of that business. Well, the produce industry I look at is specifically, it's been around for as long as we've been eating, right? And so those changes, I look at like, let's say the 20th century for that matter, up to this point when we go into facilities, these guys are, some of these people are still doing the same things they did 30 years ago. So innovation to them just may be a small transition and a change that may really turn that light bulb of innovation on. And so that may be a change of a small process, may change of what they do, make somebody's job easier. And to them, innovation can mean a variety of different things. And also people tend to categorize it literally as just equipment and technology. And again, I'm going back to this again here, just to say, but that's process, that's people, that's how you focus on really driving that, because ultimately you can have the technology, but if you don't have and work with your people to innovate and have that mindset, then all it is a paperweight that's not going to do anything, because you got to have them want to drive that and want to be a part of that too. So I think that's a big part in my mind is the people side, and innovating within people is really just driving that light bulb to them to see things in a different light.
Well, yeah, and great point. You talk about, people have been doing the same thing for 30 years, right? Why, if there's no reason to change, why change? And I think that as we are changing culturally, as the world technology data is all changing, I think it's even more important now to kind of lean into the fact that, what got you here may not get you there tomorrow. And from an operational standpoint, you can die by the vine here in operations and all of this, right? You really can.
Yeah.
And you got to figure out, maybe it's time for that change, or bringing somebody in like KESI that sits down and says, hey, let's take a hard, holistic approach at what you're doing. And let's talk about these things and see what ways we can improve, because you're going to have no choice as the world changes.
Yeah. So I think, one of the biggest forefront, I would say like 10 years ago, when we started talking through some of these things, people looked at innovation as ways to be a competitive advantage. And I still think that's a part of it, right? But I think there's also a part of it that shift is, if you're not innovative, you're not going to have the capabilities to find people to do these types of things, to be even in business in 5 years, let alone trying. You may have a product that you want to sell that everybody wants to buy, but you're not going to be able to get it there because you weren't innovative. You're stuck in the ways of saying like, hey, I'm going to do it this way because this is the way it is. The last thing you want to do is be in a point where you have to make a decision. And if you're already at a point where you have to make a decision, it's too late, because somebody's already passing you by, somebody's already doing something, and that's just going to hurt the overall part of the business. I mean, again, I feel pretty strongly about that, just because I remember looking at things within our facility when I was running one, and just be like, it was kind of like, this would be a great have. It's not necessarily a need to make this change. And now it's kind of like, well, we're kind of changing the gears now. Well, these are a need, because again, in 4 years, you're not going to be around if you don't make these changes.
Correct. So, yeah, no, I totally get that. An old adage in organic agriculture that I remember from, way back when was, we used to say it all the time. In organic farming, if you see a problem, it's too late, right? It's that proactive approach. And I think every organic grower would agree with that. Nobody wants to wait and go, oh shit, we have a problem, because it's real hard to fix. It's about being proactive. And
that proactive approach is hard within the operational side, because it's typically not a sexy thing to say. Like, hey, I got to buy some new equipment. Like, well, that doesn't really get people excited. If I got a new brand that's innovative, then, talking through a group today, talking about hydroponic straws, like that's a very cool thing. It's trending. It's looking at, to take that same type of money and allocate it towards something in the building people are like,
Yeah.
that's not really what I want to do. Nor is it
Nope.
something that attracts people to sit there and say like, hey, look at this company. They're really innovative. They just bought a new type of forklift that's got AI and automation on it. Like, well, that's not really that cool. So, all right.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. One of the things that's interesting about you guys too, and I want to get into this a little bit because I don't think there's people probably have heard of this. They probably don't know much about it. I certainly, I've heard of it, didn't know anything about it until I kind of dove into it. But talk to me about this Lean Six Sigma methodology that you guys work with.
Yeah.
First of all, what the hell? Let's go with what the hell is it? Let's start with that, and then I got a couple questions behind it. I'll throw at you.
Yeah. So, and if my partners are on here from the engineering side, I'm probably going to butcher it from their words in terms.
Butcher it. Piss them off. Butcher.
Yeah,
piss off the engineers.
That's what I'm going to do, because what I look at Lean differently than what other people look at Lean. Lean has come from the mentality of how to reduce waste within your process. And Six Sigma is more about limiting the variability and deviations from the standard of what you're doing. What does that all mean? That means, how do I do things without wasting time? And how do I control something to not be variable? At the end of the day, I always say, within our industry or within the produce industry, the one constant is variability. You're never going to get a piece of cantaloupe that comes in that's going to be exactly the same as the cantaloupe before, whether it's sizing, whether it's quality, whether it's flavor profile. You're not going to be able to do it. So, right. Where a lot of people have tried, who come into this industry within any type of food where there's a lot of variability, it's really hard to say, how do I build a process that can control it? Now, Lean is the mentality of trying to reduce some of those variabilities, whether it's through managing the supply chain, managing the process, managing certain things, how people flow through the room, how are those, and that's just really a methodology and a mindset where I see the value. And I had a mentor talk to me one time about this. He's like, let's not try and make Lean something it's not. Lean is about making money, and it's trying to reduce as much cost as you can. And it's really like a framework and a methodology to make the process work for that business model. Mm-hmm. The challenge is when people look at it historically, it's come from the car industry, it's come from heavy manufacturing. That mentality is not the same as the food industry, because it's different, and it's hard for people to make that transition. I feel very fortunate because I learned it when I was in the food industry, so I didn't know anything better, and so I was just kind of tainted by, I was like, oh, this must be, I'm doing the best I can to execute these things. But ultimately, the food industry has a different type of expectation and standard, where I feel like, as our group, we all came from the food industry. So even though we all look at this mentality and we all try and build these processes in, we also understand that, Mother Nature's in control of the produce. Customers and retailers are in control. You have a shelf life from the time you harvest that product to the time it goes. You can do the best you can, but there's also certain, factors in the industry that you won't be able to fully execute what they would consider perfect Lean. So, I don't know if that answers that question, because there's a lot of details behind it that goes in there. And I think like people can get really excited about what it all means, but and like the history of it, I think it's just a very cool mentality. I remember going through the idea of like taking my common sense, and you're like, oh, I think I should do this. Really what it is like when you read about it, you're like, oh, that's what I'm thinking through. And it just kind of helps guide you down that path. So I always look at it from anybody who likes the idea of just trying to make things better. I feel like they benefit from learning from it, because that's ultimately what you're doing. I mean,
yeah, 100%. And when I saw it and I read it, and I know what you guys do, right? And that's why we're chatting about today. It's like, wow, this is a really unique approach to walking in to a client that needs help, that's looking for help, that's looking to win the day, and have that as kind of your marching orders, your orders in your back pocket that you follow, type of a deal, because it's really about winning the day, and it's also coming in with an attitude to win the day for your clients over KESI Management, quite frankly.
Yeah. I had a mentor, the same mentor was also always telling me, he was like, what gets measured gets improved. Yeah. And so part of the conversation, you go in there like, well, how do I build a process within a place that's so variable that I can measure it? And then to your point, tomorrow, when I walk in tomorrow, did I win yesterday? Did I not win? Well, sometimes it's hard to do it in an industry like what we're living in. And so I think that Lean and that approach kind of gives you the methodology to build that. But you ultimately, at the end of the day, it gives you data, it gives you process. If you don't do anything with it, then it won't do anything, period. Right. It all boils down to the people. I mean, you got to have a cultural impact that people want to do the right thing.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll give you a two-part question here a little bit, just to kind of lean into this a little bit and kind of round it out. But first question I want to throw at you is, how does it really, the Lean Six, how does it apply to making improvements? And then the second part of that question is, can you touch on some examples of kind of how this has won the day for your client? I don't need to know client, you don't have to get all the specifics, but just kind of a little bit of an example of why this mentality that you kick the doors in with, really does work.
So here's a really, this is probably the most basic, simple one. And I just,
I'm basic and simple. So thank you.
Well, it's people, I say that and then I'm like, okay, well, I don't know how much people may be already doing this. I always just find this one is a very easy one to just think about. If you were just to if you had a map of a facility, right, or of anybody's place, whether it's the distribution center or whatever you're doing, or the field, and you were just to have a pen over that and you're pretending you were somebody, and you just followed that person around and you just traced their steps all throughout the day. And you looked around and like, wow, this guy went from all over the whole facility, walked the same path 30 different times, did this 20 different times, went through all of that. And you just kind of drew it out and you sat there and you took a step back, like, holy shit. Like, is that the most efficient process for that guy to be walking?
Right.
And then, so you take that whole process and you look at it and you sit there and say, okay, well, how can I make this guy from walking? If you like, it's great. People like to check how many steps they did, right? From a cost standpoint, do you want somebody to take 20,000 steps when they can take 2,000 steps? Because that all boils down to, efficiency. So you utilize those types of methodologies and tools in the lean process, to sit there and say, this is an inefficient way. Now I'm going to take it and I'm going to map out what is efficient for that person to do. Like within that whole spaghetti diagram, when you're just like dropping spaghetti on top of it and it shows, you sit there and say, within each of those walking paths, where was something that there's value created to the product, right? So if I'm on a field and I'm harvesting, harvesting is a value. If I'm walking to and from, the customer's not going to pay for you walking. They're paying for you to harvest. So how can you figure out how to make that person walk less and harvest more by looking at the footprint of where it's going? And then you kind of start going down the line. You can kind of see where it almost is like a wheel and it just kind of starts spinning your mind. And then you go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. But you start from a high level and then you work your way down. And where we found that work, again, whether it's a distribution center, whether it's a processor, a pack house, or a field, it's really, we started there. And then this was just one scenario. There's a lot of different tools, but we started working down that path. And then all of a sudden you realize, well, if this person was here and I didn't have to move that much, well, then I don't need these 5 other people, or I can double my capacity for what I can try to do. If their problem is I can't get enough product out, I can't pack enough, I can't process enough, I can't case pick enough. Well, now I'm going to just focus on this. Well, now all of a sudden I can increase this throughput by 4 or 5 times and figure out what I need to do. And that's where some of the solutions we can, and that doesn't require any money in terms of buying anything. That's just looking at your process. And that's like the most simplest way to do it.
Well, it's lean, right? It's whole part of the methodology, right? It's lean. It's taking that lean approach coming in, which I think it's incredibly refreshing. And again, when we peel back this quote unquote onion about operations and warehousing and this and that, these are really interesting conversations. Again, I just don't think are out there. I just don't think that the average folk, that are playing in the space and the warehouse, again, the warehouse is behind the door that's cold, right? And it's cold out there, right? They don't have that thought process. So I think it's really interesting to kind of frame that up.
Well, I think that this industry is, for the right reasons, there's a sense of reactiveness that you have to be, because, hey, my truck got held up in the ports and I'm not going to get this product when it says it's going to be here at 8, it's going to be here at noon. And I got to figure out that's consistent. So you just try and figure out what you can control. When I was coaching, I coached volunteer to coach basketball. I used to always tell the kids when I was doing it in the middle school, which was an eye opener for me, but
challenge, baby. It's a challenge.
Oh my God. I learned real quick what I did not want to do. So one of the comments we always used to talk about is like, we can control our attitude and our effort. You can't control the refs, you can't control the other team in terms of some of the stuff, but it's the same thing that we look at in the facilities. Like, you can control certain things, but you can't control everything. So just let that go, right? Let's just focus on the things we can control.
Yeah, I totally agree. No, kind of going back to where we came around, it popped into my head here and I want to throw it at you is how important is it that companies actually invest in innovation?
So, I'm obviously biased a little bit.
Well, yeah, obviously, that was kind of a rigged question, but the thing is that I think, again, coming from the perspective of a lot of people have this level of conversation, and you said it earlier, and that's why I want to kind of come back to it about I bought a forklift that has AI that, can go backwards and, spin in circle, whatever it might be, right? And they don't necessarily see that as a value. A guy in the sales office doesn't necessarily see that as a value, or some guy merchandising out on the road does not understand why he's not getting a bigger pay bump. We have new forklifts, right? They don't understand that. And so I think that's kind of where the basis of that question comes from is, how important is it that companies invest
So I
in
always
innovation?
look at, when I think about innovation, and at least most of the conversations that we have, I like to look at what's the plan for the business as a whole.
Right.
So strategically, and we spend a lot of time kind of that typically drives what innovation you need. Because if somebody's okay and they're making great margins and they don't have any growing business and they're just static and they have no issues with labor, well, maybe they don't need to innovate, right? I mean, to be honest, they're happy, they're doing what they want. But most people aren't there. They've got an issue with something. They've got an issue with product quality. They've got an issue with service. They got an issue where they got the capability to double their business and they can't get there. There's only a few ways. You can't throw bodies at the industry anymore. And so what I mean by that is, like, with the innovations piece, these companies have to take a step back and look strategically, how are we going to get to that path? I was on a call this morning and we were talking about they're going to double their revenue in 5 years. And so one of the questions was like, okay, so are you just going to buy somebody to do that? Or are you planning to do that in your facility today? Because there's a lot of things that you're going to need to look at from an innovation, because you've got the demand, but there's like, here we are, and there you go. This is the goal. Right. All of those steps in between, there's some execution and there's some stuff. You can buy some equipment, but you also have to figure out the culture we live in and the environment we live in today is not at all what it was, even 5 years ago or 6 years ago, because of what the labor. So that innovation has to be there. And I'm a very big advocate for that, just because I hate to see, partners we've worked with, think that, okay, well, that's not going to happen to me. And because they don't make that innovation, because they're not willing to take the time now before there's a problem to look at what I need to invest in from an innovation. Again, whether that's a change of mindset culturally, to invest in your people from an education standpoint, to teach them lean, right? So they can do it themselves, or to innovate with on the automation or the equipment, or come up with different values. Again, I just look at that as, if you're not thinking about that, other people are. Sure. And they are doing the exact same things. And that type of thing, if you look at a competition comparison, at some point in time, there's going to be a pivot where you're going to stay equal and somebody else is going to innovate and they're going to take that market.
Yeah. Well, it made a really great point when you said, here we are today, 5 years, we're going to be doubling revenue. And when you say we're going to be doubling revenue, that's a feel good, right? Okay. But there's a big gap between today and 5 years that, just because you say you're going to double it, yes. There's no genie out there, right? There's nobody rubbing that bottle saying cha-ching, right? It doesn't work that way. So, but with that being said, though, what do you think? What do you think prevents companies from making those investments? Do you think it's fear? Do you think?
Yeah,
obviously capital's a big one, obviously, but fear is another one. I think that's really that's actually real.
That is a big thing. So it's funny you say that, because even when we talk within automation or innovation, is a lot of people talk about the beautiful thing. I'm going to buy a robot, right? I'm going to get this cool thing, and it's going to do all these things, and it's going to be the best thing I'm going to show somebody walking through. But what's going to end up happening is, in 3 months from now, it's going to be sitting idle because you didn't invest and innovate within your people, or you don't have a system, or you don't do it. Well, to answer your question, fear is a big part of it, but fear of certain things is even more apparent within that.
Yeah. Okay.
So somebody, let's say I got $1 million and I'm going to write a check for this piece of equipment. That is not going to do anything. You may look innovative because you have a piece of equipment, but if you don't do something within a system, or that's really hard, or invest in the people, that's really hard, because that drives change management, or I'm going to tell people, we're not going to do it this way anymore because that's antiquated, we're going to move. That creates a lot of pain, and pain creates fear of wanting to do it and inhibits you from wanting to go down that path. So I always look, to your point, you're spot on. Fear is a big part of it. Yeah,
I would think so. Something and I'm going to throw you a 35,000 foot question, just because you see so much from your perspective. I mean, you're not, you're in a lot of different places. You have a lot of clients. You get a very broad perspective of operations and what's going on. So I've got a couple of questions I want to throw at that 35,000 foot level. The first one I want to throw at you, though, is who's going to be making and supplying our food in the future?
That's a good one.
Hey, I don't screw around here. I come in hot. I come in.
No,
big.
that was a straight to gut punch. That's a good one because it's a very valid question, and there is not people lining up to work in a 37-degree facility or a freezer or wherever you may go, and that is very, very tough to do. I mean, and not only that, I don't think the market we deal with has the margins to provide somebody to pay somebody $30 an hour to stand. So, you know what I mean? That it's just not there today, and the cost of living has changed. So I think a couple of things, in my opinion, are going to ultimately end up happening. So within some areas that require a lot of people, again, produce processing or something like that, there's a lot of people that are investing in technology to kind of help with that. But there's also parts of it where people are so used to having this perfect product because there's an individual looking at it every single time. Well, the only way to get away from that is like something mechanical or something processed. My point is you may look at things evolving to what the customer expectations are. So, you know, today everybody's used to something perfectly round and managed. I mean, there's a lot of innovation coming out there. You're either going to have people that are going to be provided the same product that's going to be a little bit different than what you're used to. You're going to have a limited option of products if you don't have people, just because they can't do it all like what everybody used to, or you're going to have a significant market consolidation of certain things. I think I look at the fields and the harvesting and what goes into some of that when we were out in Nogales and Yuma and looking at those. I mean, like, to me, like, that is the most crazy thing to watch and how manual that stuff is today. And there just aren't people there to do it. So the market's in a concern. And the only way to either do that is increase pricing, which then impacts the customer, which is a challenge. So then everything else in between there from the field to there has to be figured out. I know that doesn't answer your question because, to be honest, I mean, I'm actively trying to figure out that as we go through, because 2 years ago was so different than a year ago, which is so different than now, which I know is going to be so different. I mean, because when everybody got consolidated down during COVID, the food industry went crazy. Right. But there's a lot of excess people that you could fill up with the bodies. Well, now, you know, with unemployment, what it is, it's hard to find those people. So I think people are striving to figure out, man, what am I going to do? And so there are a lot of very cool companies, but that takes money, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff out there that's coming, but it's not a perfect solution today. You still are going to have to have people. And so I think some things are going to have to change with the immigration in terms of how we get people in. Some people are going to have to figure out how do we start with wages and how that gets trickled down to the customer, because ultimately everybody's got to make something or they're going to go out of business.
No doubt. No, so, it's a real challenge. And again, you know, and that's why I was keen on having you guys come on here, because I think your perspective is one that doesn't get a lot of airway. Yeah. And I think it's important that people recognize that, you know, you're going to have to put a coat on and go out there and talk and figure out how you're going to win the day in a lot of ways, because it's so valuable. I want to stay on this train a little bit, though, in this thought process and just get your perspective, because, again, you talk to a lot of people. Share with me a little bit about the current supply situation. You know, I was privy to a conversation today where somebody shared a map of a live map, GPS map of how many boats are sitting off the coast of China right now, trying to get on. I mean, it's amazing. It's just like thousands of boats are sitting there trying to come in, you know, and this whole deal. And it's certainly, we're dealing with a massive global supply issue right now that's going to continue. You know, I don't see it correcting itself anytime soon. I don't think gas, all these other things, inflation, all these things, they're just not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to be a drawn out process, as this usually is with these kind of situations. So talk to me a little bit about your perspective on the current supply situation. And if you want to talk pro, you can talk about whatever you want, or just generalities. And then, you know, also too, if you've got some feedback from some of your customers, what they're feeling, well, I think it'd be interesting for people to hear. And again, you don't need to tell any names. So whatever's comfortable.
To your point, there's a couple different things, right? I was looking at when the food you got fresh, you got, let's just say, for lack of a better term, shelf stable, whether it's frozen, whatever you did. Each one of those provides its own challenges, right? So if I got to get a load of product from the West Coast to the East Coast, you can't find enough drivers, right? You can't find it, or that, and the cost is astronomical to what it is. Or it's very difficult to do, which I see a lot of our clients are like actively trying to figure out how they can collaborate with additional partners to find the appropriate solution on that side. And that's just say in the fresh area. The trucking and boats there is an impact. Where I was talking to one of my friends on the West Coast who deals, they're definitely impacted by it. It's I'm trying to think of the right terminology. I mean, it is an impact, but like not to get too far down in the weeds. The sizing of boats could be different because it's more frequent, so they don't have some of the same issues from a fresh standpoint. But we're working with a company that does a bunch of spices out of, and they're buying their stuff internationally. So what they're trying to figure out is, well, how do you manage your lead time on that? When something was just a normal, I'm buying it from overseas and then I'm bringing it back over here. That's normally this. So what do? They just buy as much as they can because they never know when they're going to get it. So now all of a sudden people are stuck with warehouse full of product, and they're trying from a business standpoint. They're like, it's just, oh crap, I'm stuck with all this stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. And so they're trying to figure out, okay, how do they manage it? How do they do it? We're running out of space, but do you take one or the other? Do you lose the opportunity to sell a product, or just because you don't want to buy enough inventory? And so I thought that, through the changes of the supply chain over the past couple of years, like it would be getting better. It seems as like there's one thing that's like, that's just the same status quo that it was, 3-4 years ago. Maybe a change here or there domestically with stuff, but I mean, internationally, when you're trying to ship things in and out, like it's been a mess. And I look at, you take that side, and then the other part of the business where we focus on, let's take out products, talk about building, So we were working with somebody and we were helping build and design a facility, and it sounds crazy. They got everything for the facility, everything going, but I can't get a dock door for 18 months, dock door, so that supply chain, that's like, hey, a company, I'm growing double. I've got my product. I've got no issues. I've got all this stuff. I can't do it because I can't get a dock door. And you're just like, wait a second, this is something that it doesn't make much sense. I'm like, how does that work? And so now, or you start building a facility, and then like the guys come in, they're like, hey, your whole facility's done. If you want your roof, you got to pay 30 to 40% more now because of the supply chain. And like, that is a true impact that people are experiencing.
For sure.
Trying to figure out. And I think people are trying to solve it with the industry and like processing and equipment, but like even the food. But I look at it like this: there's going to be a huge gap of like capacity for people to supply more product because so much has been delayed from even having the ability to produce it, period, or have it.
Correct. Well, you're seeing it with cars, 40% over sticker now on cars, right? But your point, I've got folks that were making additions to their facility that were completely halted because they had no bolts.
Yeah, right.
They literally they had no bolts. They were completely shut down because there was no bolts. They were waiting for them to finally show up.
It's kind of screws with my head a little bit because we've been living with a product that, like, by the time you make it, you got like 5 days before it's dead or you can't eat it anymore.
Right.
Well, you're like, what do you mean you don't have bolts on the shelf? Like, that's something you could have an endless supply because there's no issue not to. But it's changed, and I think that's a big thing. Like, if you want a piece of equipment, you're talking 22 months, right? Or 22 weeks, excuse me, or for whatever it may be. When it could have been 12 weeks, and that's a big thing. Hey, I got this new customer wants all this stuff. Hey, guy, I can't do it. Well,
you make a great point that this trickle down is about scalability, and you think about 9.8 billion people by 2050 and what we're dealing with now. It's going to be a long, they're just not going to be able to go through the drive-through to get fed. It ain't going to work that way, right? So you're right. It's a really good point. This has been really kind of a fun conversation because I think it put some light on to a lot of topics too. Like we said in the very beginning, people don't talk about and people don't put in their mind, like, I need to pay attention. This is a topic in my mind that your company needs to pay attention to. Your sales guys need to understand how this affects them. Your operation guys, obviously, your truck drivers, even your customers, right? Because this really is a positive cost of food, in my opinion, when you start to have these conversations. So with that being said, what's next for KESI? What's going on with you guys? What's breaking news?
So, I mean, for us, the big thing that we've spent a lot of time working on, and I would say this is a core value of ours, is the food safety aspect of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis is I feel like the visibility of what we're going through with the technology that we have and the ability to have transparency, which is awesome, is we're trying to do our best to always be on how to understand where food safety expectations should from a best-in-class facility, and how do you build that into the everyday cultural, how do you build that into your design facility? How do you build it into what we were talking through the processes on the floor with the people? How do you instill that? Because at the end of the day, if you can't make safe food, you shouldn't be in business. And
Well, no
I
shit
think from
there.
an innovation standpoint, I think we're focusing very hard on making sure as we build our processes and we work with our clients, that that's always the first and forefront. For where we're at as we've continued to grow from our business, it's been awesome to see how many different businesses have different mindsets. But the thing is, it's where I feel like coming from produce and now seeing, dry goods and frozen goods and all this stuff, there's a lot of opportunity to cross collaborate between industries where I feel like there's been a silos. I mean, produce is produce, you look in a grocery store, you got your aisles. It's kind of how it's been when I think about manufacturers. And so it's been great to see how areas of opportunity from one industry can transition into another. And I think as we continually delve into our future and we continue to grow with our businesses, how can we break down those doors of communication between the industries to really capitalize on making this sustainable for each group? Because at the end of the day, I'm going to go home and have dinner, right? And I'm going to wake up and I'm going to have breakfast. So food's going to be on the table. And so I want to ensure that that food can be there in a way that is cost effective for the customer. For,
Sure.
My wife's going to buy food. I want her, she wants to buy a good quality product at a good price. I want to make sure that's there. I want to make sure the food that my kids are eating is safe and healthy. And
Right.
whatever we can do as a business to continually strive and drive that type of innovation, whether it's through, again, people or equipment or buildings or whatever it may be. I mean, that's ultimately our goal and what we strive
Sure.
for. And it's, like I said, a couple of years ago when we started, it was one way, and now it's just continually evolved to push those bounds. And I love it. It's been a lot of fun. I told myself I'd throw anybody who had any type of business, whether it's in food, I said, I want to see it. And again, I'll come out there and see it because I just want to know what it's like just to see the differences.
Absolutely. Well, my takeaway from this is what you've shared with everybody today. And I hope this is what people walk away from, is that it's going to be really important that you understand the issues and the solutions before it's a need.
Yeah.
And I really think that's a lot of what you brought up today. And a lot of what you hit home for folks is to have these conversations, Google, get on KESI Management, get on your website, track you guys down. Austin will come see you. He's a fun guy to hang out with. We'll have a good time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. He's great. Hey, by the way, he's great at karaoke.
Oh, I'll sure as hell try.
I had no idea. I just felt like saying that just because I had no choice.
Good.
But no, dude, thank you for hanging out with me today.
Absolutely.
This has been a great conversation. I mean, I was excited about this. We've been talking about it for a while and putting it together, but I think it's, going to be really eye-opening for people. I think that hopefully it is that point of reflection that people need to understand. We need to look at these issues and we need to find these solutions before they become those, before it becomes an issue, because it's going to kick your ass from an operational standpoint. And it's really hard to recover. Markets go up and down, right? Something could be $5 a day and $20 tomorrow. Operationally, it doesnn't work like that.
No, it
right?
doesn't.
And so
That's
it's
right.
important that we lean into it. So, dude, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I had a blast. And like we talked about, how do we make ops not the most boring thing in there? Because
how to make ops fun.
How do you make it fun, and how do you get people to recognize it? And I had a blast. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about it. I think it's a lot of fun.
Dude, thank you very much.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, totally my pleasure. Come back. Let's do this again. I think it's important. I think the supply thing, where things are at, I think we should, I'd love to have you come back and rekindle this thing and keep people informed, because it's a great conversation, but I think it's something we have to keep talking about. It is a positive cost of food that we must invest in.
Agreed. Awesome,
cool.
Man. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure, dude. Hey, everybody, thanks for hanging out with us. I appreciate you. Go check these guys out on the Google machine. Look them up, talk to them, give Austin a call. He's great at karaoke. I just told you that. But thank you very much for watching and listening and being part of this. We are just so appreciative of the growth and what we're doing and the amount of people that we're meeting and talking to all around the globe now. It's really, really a lot of fun. Check us out on social media. Like I always say, that's where the cool kids are. So we're there. And go inspire somebody, right? That's a very important part of our day. Go say hello to somebody that you haven't said hello to before. I guarantee you'll both have a great day for it. Take care. We'll see you on Todd-Versations, Todd-Bits, and all over the place. Be good. Peace out. See ya.